my new ideas from the realm of evolutionary psychology, known as orphaned instincts. So, what does that mean? Well, I will tell you. So, an instinct or a drive, and we know there's three that males experience from the work of Martin Seeger and John Barry, that men actually, and I'll better grab some of my notes here, that men experience the drive to provide and protect, to fight and win, and to regulate emotion. So it's my hypothesis that many of the manifestations you see today that would endeavor to help you survive or to mate in an ancient world, and we'll start with men, are now being manifested in interesting ways in the present world. And so some of those ways are not adaptive for procreating. Some of those ways are when someone doesn't have a way, doesn't have a spouse or a way to foreseeably meet them. So you will see things like the pet fostering and referring to pets as fur babies for both women and men. You'll see people putting attention into AI significant others. So the instinct there to mate being driven into something that has no potential for it, nowhere to go. So for men, fake wars and fake intimacy are orphaned instincts. So the instinct to provide for a woman and to show your value and worth can be redirected into things like donating to an OF, donating to a cause that shows that you're a man with some means, right? So you may wonder, well, why do some men pay for adult content? There really isn't a benefit to that when so much free exists. So my idea is those men often are craving a way to provide resources and show that provisioning potential in a capacity to be noticed. But because they either are unsuccessful on the apps or are shy, that instinctual desire to leck, L E K, the lecking mechanism of showing off your plumage, showing off something that is a demonstration of your competency or charisma as a man, is instead poured into something that has no direct mating potential. So that's a good definition. That'll probably go in the paper. It's an instinct that has no mating or thriving potential. Okay. So no surviving and no thriving potential would be what I would say. So I think it's in order to look at some of the data out there from the giants whose shoulders I'm standing on in the Evo psych world. So, what this really pertains to is an idea of evolutionary mismatch. And so, if traits or mechanisms are adaptive in ancestral environments, but they become maladaptive when the environment changes, you can have things like violence, right? Where does that need to get poured into? Well, now we have things like sports. And so um, we so human psychological mechanisms are adaptations that evolve to process environmental inputs, turning them into behavioral outputs that on average increase survival reproductive prospects. Okay, this is from an article that I'm going to cite. Modern contexts differ vastly from the environments that existed as human psychological mechanisms evolved, though. So many of the outputs now differ in quantity and intensity or don't have the same fitness associations, leading many mechanisms to produce maladaptive output. So, evolutionary mismatch process um, is um, a novel concept, and the paper I'm looking at is from 2017. It's a very fascinating concept that talks about how things that we're doing now don't fit what was once expected. So when we look at um, effect on reproducible fitness, okay, um, birth control methods prevent unwanted children. So that could be people who are high trait conscientiousness who decide not to have kids, whereas we need conscientious people. So, um, an example of increasing desirable effect Is internet dating providing high mate value individuals with greater access to high value mates? So that's something that our current environment does. But the what is undesirable that's increased is nepotistic favoring of relatives over more qualified individuals in a business. Okay. Um, I'm going to have to dive into more of this too as I write my paper. But what we kind of have to realize is that uh, we're always being impacted by our unconscious drives. And so the environment changes that we're in faster than our psychological mechanisms. So for men, showing off and showing that they can protect is an evolutionarily selected for trait. And a lot of that now goes into things like sports and working out, right? The instinct to protect your spouse and your kids has to go elsewhere. It's kind of an orphaned instinct with nothing to do in our modern environment. Or if somebody can't have kids for some reason, or they don't find the man that they want yet, a woman who has the drive to the maternal drive is going to have to put that into something else. She might put it into her work with the children that she teaches, and she may have quite a bit of emotional attachment to those kids, and too much that for the career, right? Too much attachment for all of those kids when you can't possibly control everything in their lives the way that a mother typically can. So that's very risky for your emotional health. So that's one way of looking at it. Um, so error management theory. Okay. So selection favors the cheaper error when two mistakes have an asymmetrical fitness cost. What that essentially means is that if an orphan instinct is a bias or an overreaction, that serve to protect you from a costly threat, right? Even if it's irrational, it's protective. And so things like being self promoting, things like overconfidence and cockiness would have prevented you in the past from being taken advantage of. And it would have alienated you and probably had you be seen as somewhat um, of a boor. But to be a chump might have been more costly in our ancient territory, in our ancient psychological and physiological landscape. And so essentially, um, I would suggest that orphan instincts are adaptive motivational systems that persist in the modern mind after the original ecological, social, or survival conditions that gave them function have disappeared or been transformed. So that's helpful to think about. So again, I'm talking about evolutionary mismatch theory, and what I'm talking is what gets produced out of it. So um, what gets produced is instincts with nowhere to go. And some of the ones that I've covered before have been, again, OF um, subscriptions, nurturing pets instead of kids, um, mogging, meaning status mogging with men, looks maxing. So looks maxing is very gladiatorial, and it even involves physical pain. If you look at most men's ways of showing fitness, you're going to get elements of resilience to physical pain, and you're going to get a communal element. You're going to get combat that results in physical and emotional challenge. And so if you look at the looks maxing trend, like with clavicular and others, and you look at the pain that goes into the face hammering and chiseling, and I'm not making that up, and you look at the pain that goes into the working out, and you even look at some of the drug usage, there's a high risk to that, right? So lecking as an actual, oh, I like this. Okay. So evolutionary psychology taught me, and there's a book called Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters. Okay. So bear with me on this. So in that book, I learned about lecking that involves males aggregating in a common area, a lek, L-E-K, to engage in competitive displays and courtship rituals, okay, to attract women, to attract females. Males provide no resources in a lecking system or parental care. The female only receives fertilization, making the choice based on the mate's genetic quality. Right. So the let me see. This is good for me to get into. Leka. So the term comes from Swedish word leka, meaning to play or to dance. Right. So we have to, so greater sage grouse. Okay. So essentially, we're looking at men getting into communal environments and showing off. And I can't go over enough how this would have been extremely um, this would have been an extremely adaptive thing to be showy and to be aggressive or to be taller or whatever than other males, and it would have been a zero sum thing. Like it would have been highly important to get a mate and do anything to get it. And so, if you look at how that would have programmed thought patterns across humanity, if you look at things like wars and winner take all and people taking brides, things like aggression and males taking charge would have been so selected for that. I mean, that's such our current last 100 to 300 years is such a drop in the bucket of a more genteel society. I mean, even the last 1,000 years, right? Or 2,000. So before that, in ancient days, there would have been more incentive to do whatever it takes and for men to behave a certain way. So um this is all I'm happy to take questions as well, and I can check in on that now. But so an orphaned instinct is um essentially a program that it hasn't been updated and it needs somewhere, and it tries to manifest in it's an input that doesn't have a place to go now, and it tries to find just enough of a fit that works. So for men, you're going to get something like that desire to compete in rough and tumble play and to make your mark, and that's going to go into something like wrestling, not the entertainment, but the high school wrestling, college wrestling. It's going to go into football. Um, for fighting, for earning, it's going to go into cut through courtroom and business practices, right? That's going to be where someone's instincts go that are aggressive. Um, and so you're going to see the problem is when an orphan instinct causes damage because it exacerbates and damages your function in a realm where it wasn't meant to fit. So if let me give an example. So the biggest example I have is if a man is donating a lot to someone on OF or another cam girl site, that money isn't going to building up a family. That money isn't going toward him doing anything that serves long-term procreation, right, or survival. So if a woman in a is in a situationship, that isn't going to go anywhere. Like if a man is courting her and she's wooed, and there's the desire that a strong male figure is wooing or supporting you, it's going to be that might trigger some programming, but then it's not adaptive because if he's a situationship, he's not, and you don't want that. You're trying to earn your way to him. It doesn't ultimately help you reproduce or thrive. So those are some examples. Um, when men are unnecessarily aggressive and they become imprisoned because their aggressive drives are put into something unuseful, that's an example of orphan instincts to fight and defend. You have to find the input where they work. You have to, excuse me, an outlet. So um, I'm going to be developing the curriculum on this and what that looks like, and accepting interviews as well. But it is a new area of psychology, and as far as I know, the only thing that's out there that really goes along with this would be the the idea of evolutionary mismatch, which I'm happy to give credit to, right? Like that came first, that's fine. um we're talking about though the uh the instinct, the urges that come out of that. I mean, you look at texting and checking in on someone, and you look at how that is a poor version, right, of checking in with someone in person. And if you're a mother and you can go check on your offspring, and all mammals do this, you go check on your offspring, make sure they're okay, pull them around the nest. But if you can't do that and you're having to text them, your kid doesn't get back to you, you don't get that immediate feedback. And so your maternal instinct isn't being um, put into the right area. So, and also really a better example would be, again, when you want children and you're having to direct that impulse into something else, or you want romance and you want someone who can court you, but it's completely the wrong person, socially, biologically, whatever. I mean, you see beavers make dams out of different elements in a home if they're taken out of the wild. So humans will find ways to combat each other, males will, in whatever environment they're in, and women will find different way. And again, I want to be very clear, not again, I want to for the first time say, this is not a way to say that everyone is programmed as a stereotypical hetero male or woman. I'm not, I'm talking about generalities here. And in evolutionary psychology, the two main questions are what thinking leads to someone surviving and what thinking leads to someone mating. And so basically, the that's those are the guiding questions in this field, is what is likely to have been selected for to keep us going as a species. And so many of those things are going to be ways to show off to another person and get your needs met that way. I mean, so being emotionally needy is going to be a tactic. Like I talked about regression earlier, and how regression calls out for your tribe to check on you. Well, how could that have survived? So if you regress emotionally and become immature, you're going to ask for more succor. You're going to ask for more satiety and being satiated, being emotionally supplicated and placated. So how would that have evolved? How would that have become an adaptational? Well, for one, you'll make sure people remember you and have eyes on you, whether or not you annoy them or not. Because if you're in their tribe and you are someone who could have helped them survive, they're probably going to keep you around. So that would have been actually rather adaptive. So that level of anxious attachment and asking for help would have persisted. Now, when you do it on online dating and you do it on social media, that instinct, right, has nowhere to go, and it's the wrong output. So much of what we do now that doesn't fit the biology and the programming we have, the nature and the nurture can be attributed back to this. So I think it's really interesting. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you want me to write more about it, I will. I've got to have an article about it forthcoming, but it helps me to talk this out. So if you like that and you like joining me as I talk this stuff out so I can't put it off until later, please let me know. I want to give credit though. A lot of the people who talked about this stuff before would be people like David Buss, the USS, the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis, implications for psychological science. That is a big article that I'm drawing from. So, examples of mismatched sources and types from that article. A source of natural mismatch that's forced would be environmental changes inducing mass extinctions. Okay. A human induced change would be eye mechanisms receiving fewer stimuli required for proper development. Okay. I'm sure that makes sense if I read the whole article. But human induced change, candy being preferred over fruit. Okay. By food selection mechanisms. Aha. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. So, candy, as an example from this article, is highly sweet. Oh, this is great. And this fits in with something I've talked about called um, processed intimacy. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the article too. Note to self, note to the AI that I used to edit this. So, processed communication is process is texting. Processed intimacy is pornography. Okay, processed attention is Instagram, thirst traps. It's all mediated. So orphan instincts, here we go. Another definition. Orphan instincts are mediated forms of instincts, so orphan instincts are instincts that once led to surviving and thriving, and that when mediated through modern technology cause a mismatch. That's how I want to put it. Now, that's working. That's a working definition coming off the dome. So, okay, cause, change in input intensity. Okay. increased number of opposite sex individuals, affecting mechanisms that calibrate relationship commitment. Okay. Missing input, lack of a supportive family network that serves as input to mechanisms that calibrate resource availability and reproductive timing. Okay. Um, Here's one. So somebody already wrote about this, and it's fine because it was before. Let's see. This was 2017. Yeah, that's what I thought. So this is before I even really. I don't know. I was probably saying something like this back then, but okay. Here we have internet pornography replacing actual partners as input to mechanisms that trigger sexual excitement and induce reproductive activity. Blah. Okay. What does that freaking mean? I will tell you. So it means that internet pornography provides a way. Internet pornography is the mediated form of a real good. A real good is surviving, anything that relates to that, and thriving, meaning mating and creating a family and tribe. Okay. Any of those two things that directly contribute to having that are a good. Things that hijack those feelings into nothing are not net goods. So video games allow you to create artificial competency. So competency for men allows them to directly have mating opportunities and build up the capacity to feel confident and to communicate about something. So great. If that's a career field, great. If it's even computer stuff, great. But if it's only video games that nobody has interested in, it doesn't have a competitive quality, right? Then it isn't a net good. Now, things like Fortnite tournaments now exist. So you have the ability to say, well, Jeremy, what if somebody becomes a famous video game player to the point that that is their competency? Well, I would argue that it becomes a net good because that's being shoehorned and that's evolved as a pastime enough that it's kind of a one-to-one thing with the original instinct. So like sports, being a sports star now is being a modern day gladiator, which in the past would have, even for distant past, would have been a successful man who survived ancient wars to protect his family from a dog eat dog, Neanderthal eat Neanderthal world. So follow as close as you can to the original instincts and you get more payoff. Okay. Follow the instinct to as close as you can for surviving and thriving, and you get more payoff. So channel that instinct, that drive into the right source. Okay. So selection of leaders who are tall and masculine, despite such traits not being necessary for the tasks at hand. That's an example of a change in consequences of output in mismatch theory. So interesting. So that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing in our current environment, but because those things would have helped people survive in ancient times, then that would have worked. We don't want sugar. We don't want, let's see. We don't want things that hijack and overfill our desires. So food addiction and porn addiction are both too much of the thing that too much of a good thing. Okay. I'm going to heavily edit this, but it's too much of a good thing. Too much food, right? Means obesity. Okay. Too much exercise without food means anorexia or muscles consuming themselves. Too much autophagy. I guess that would be the term. Too much pornography, too much sex even, with being a pickup artist. You either stretch yourself too thin and have no connection, or you don't have the money to afford all the children that you create, right? So in defining orphaned instincts, what we have to look at is how evolutionary mismatch produces them. How does it create an instinct? And that means what is foreclosed in our society now? Example, in the past, it would have been more common for men to approach women and to, quote, hit on them and to show off their emotional, like their interest. And that was considered the natural lecking ground. Our actual surroundings would have been that lecking ground. And so anywhere would have been fine for that. Well, now we've created apps that say, and this is an unintended consequence, I think, hopefully it's unintended, of if you already have apps to do that thing, why do it in public? That's creepy. And so men's past things of dressing well and having flowers maybe, or having the marketplace, literally a marketplace, not of ideas, but of wherever you go, the bazaar, right? Bazaar, being the place that you go to court, it's now online. Well, what do you do? How do you lek there? Well, we already know from data that um, men with more square faces are preferred online dating than in person. Like it's a whole thing of the camera adds 10 pounds or however many pounds. Online dating, the pictures have to be really good because there's so many and it's not as immediate as in person. So again, visual stimuli is a mismatch for online dating because it's never as good as in person. It's never that intimacy. So it's mediated flirting and mating. So what happens is you have an orphan instinct to lack and to bodybuild and to show that you can fight and win and prove that you are a good fit for a woman. And it's being driven into looks maxing and self harm with the cosmetic procedure. So I'm saying self harm. I think if it's all safe and it looks great, fine. But we have to ask the why. Why do you have to do that now? Well, Clavicular does this stuff. He goes out in public and does this stuff and hits on people. But initially, the camera is now the mediator so much that we're being squeezed into a new evolutionary path that's very digital. So if you look at the ultimate conclusion of orphaned instincts, you get the people in Wall-E who are in the chairs and all extremely obese and can't do anything. Their instincts have nowhere to go. They are perfectly so all our instincts will be orphaned when our environment is completely changed from what it was where we evolved. So I'm going to land the plane there. I think that's how I'm going to explain it. I've got a few key definitions I dropped throughout this that um, I'm going to pull from and quote myself because this was all off the dome except where I read from the Evolutionary Mismatch Hypothesis article by Norman Lee, Mark Vugt, V-U-G-T, and Stephen Collarelli. So those are the three authors. I give them full credit for what I quoted on that chart of the example of sugar, um, and whatnot. So, all right, thank y'all. This was my big reveal, and I hope to get questions and hear more from you all. I'm gonna check my. Let's see. So I can't actually, if you're talking on Substack, I can't actually see whatever you said. So what we're going to have to do, you'll have to email it to me. So, or rather, excuse me, hit me up on either Substack or X. That's fine. I love both of those. Yay, yay, yay. So let's do it. Thank you so much. Get me